what's happened over the last 20 years is that it's not that people have changed their viewpoints. Not the way I think about myself, but the way I think about you and how I engage with you. So there's been a greater recognition and acknowledgement of the legitimacy of other people's positions. And that's where the issue has changed, that there's been a development of mutual respect between people, that we do still see each other as enemies to some extent because we're aspiring to very different positions. But there's been a greater recognition of that people's views are legitimately held.
Il 10 aprile 1998 a Belfast viene firmato il Good Friday Agreement, ovvero l'accordo del Venerdì Santo, che sancisce la fine del conflitto armato tra unionisti britannici e nazionalisti irlandesi in Irlanda del Nord. Questo storico compromesso ha permesso di deporre le armi, ma le profonde cicatrici del conflitto non si sono ancora rimarginate. Se da un lato i muri di cemento e pregiudizio persistono, dall'altro c'è un mondo di persone, istituzioni e associazioni che stanno cercando di fare ammenda con il proprio passato, creando punti di contatto fra le due comunità. Per comprendere cosa sia cambiato dal Good Friday Agreement ad oggi, l'estate scorsa abbiamo intrapreso un viaggio tra Belfast, Derry e Dublino, incontrando persone dalle esperienze e dalle storie più diverse. Un viaggio tra muri fisici e mentali che separano famiglie, strade, città, regioni. Un viaggio sul confine.
The peace process has been successful in effectively ending the armed conflict here. What it's been less successful at doing has been in the implementation of the agreement to establish new institutions of governance, devolved institutions of governance. The process itself has led, over the course of the 20 years, to a significant reduction in tensions and hostilities between the two communities, but the society is still very highly segregated. It's still very highly divided. The best you can say is that the agreement has led to a situation where people are able to live in the same environment peacefully whilst recognising those divisions and living with those divisions. And other people, academics, have talked about, in Ireland, they never forget anything. We forget lots of things here, but what it's more important as to what things we do remember. The social memory actually focuses on what makes us distinctive and what makes us separate, and why we need to remain separate and distinctive from each other.
My uncle was Jackie Duddy, and he was the first person that died on Bloody Sunday, but I wasn't even born. But my family, they weren't political, but they always said fight for justice, and that was the only thing we did. We didn't know anything about politics. When I became a reporter, I had to teach myself about politics because my family told me nothing except your uncle died on a peace march. The whole world knows my uncle was innocent, and that's all my family wanted. But it took 47 years for the world to know that, and all my mum wanted was for them to know that he wasn't a nail bomber and he was innocent. And our family were innocent because you were a terrorist family. So when my mum went through airports or anything, they were always stopped and searched and kept behind, and always because you were Bloody family. That must be Bloody Sunday. It was a perception of your family. So it was worth the fight for that now we have a clear name, and all the families have the clear name, and it was worth it to hear innocent, and the whole world know that Derry was telling the truth. That was really important. 28 people being shot on Bloody Sunday, and one soldier is to be prosecuted, Soldier F, which is still a success. And we said a success for one family is a success for all the families, 28 families, but only a few of them have success with Soldier F. So we have to get behind them and say, okay, it's for us too, because after 50 years there's almost no evidence out there.
Il 30 gennaio 1972, nella città di Derry-Londonderry, una manifestazione dell'Associazione per i diritti civili dell'Irlanda del Nord venne interrotta dalle forze dell'ordine. I paracadutisti britannici, con il compito di disperdere il corteo, aprirono il fuoco sulla folla, uccidendo 13 persone, più una che morirà qualche mese più tardi per le ferite riportate. Questo evento, già di per sé tragico, venne ripreso da giornalisti e reporter presenti sulla scena. Le immagini di quella giornata, passata alla storia con il nome di Bloody Sunday, vennero trasmesse e ritrasmesse, assumendo un'enorme rilevanza mediatica in tutto il mondo. L'effetto sul pubblico e sulle istituzioni fu tale da renderlo uno degli eventi più significativi del conflitto. La prima inchiesta scagionò i militari coinvolti, mentre la seconda, a 25 anni di distanza, confermò le responsabilità delle forze dell'ordine, senza però soddisfare il senso di giustizia di parte dei nazionalisti irlandesi.
And even what Arthur says, and it's an important thing to note, that during the conflict, the solution to the problem was they see, the British government seen this as a security problem, so it needed a security solution. So that's why you had internment, which was the jailing of civilians without a trial and without a jury of their peers. So during the conflict, there was not, the British government certainly were not on the page that it was a political solution that was needed. What they seen this was an internal UK problem that will be handled by the UK government, and they didn't want a political solution, they wanted a military solution to this problem. That, from basically the Downing Street Declaration, was the start of what Arthur talked about, was the Good Friday Agreement structure and how peace was garnered through political institutions and community interaction.
Well, the biggest, in relation to that, the biggest one was the creation of the Assembly and the Executive, which was the kind of elections followed the referendum in terms of endorsing the Good Friday Agreement, and then elections followed, and that what was created was a power sharing kind of executive and assembly that was particularly created to ensure the maximum amount of the people could be involved in it. The European Union created the peace process that was specifically designed to help kind of cement the peace process at a local community level, so local community groups could access European peace funds to engage in either single identity work within their own area, or do cross-community work or inter-community work with populations across interfaces and in a broader context across the whole 6 countries.
Some people could argue, know what I mean, is there peace? There's a peace process came on, is there still peace? Know what I mean? There's still bombs happening around this community. Just down in Bishop Street, I see the courthouse, we see the device explode. You obviously heard about murder too happened in the city, and there's, unfortunately, there's people still in the city are hell bent on murdering, and especially looking to attempt to murder police officers. Only last week there was an attempted murder on police officers in Craigavon, and the walls, the interface, is a very important aspect for the fountain. If that wasn't here, the fountain community wasn't here, there would be no unionists on the side of the water. Now, the fact is, you still build peace, know what I mean? There hasn't been no trouble this year yet, but, well, touch wood, there will be no trouble. But the fact is, this time last year, there was nights of rioting up there, severe rioting too, where IRA came out the streets and opened fire and shot gunshots on the Derry's walls at police officers looking to attempt to murder them. But the fact is, obviously, we have barrier being up, we have different social problems in this community than they do in the other communities outside it. But it's still very easy to produce peace with the barrier still there. For the people here, it does protect their properties, you know what I mean?
Le divisioni tra le due comunità trovano la loro manifestazione fisica nei Peaceful, i muri che dividono i quartieri irlandesi e britannici nelle città di Belfast e Derry-Londonderry. Le prime barriere sono state erette a inizio Ottocento, ma tutti i principali muri sono sorti con la spirale di violenza e ritorsione generata dai Troubles. Inizialmente si trattava di barriere di filo spinato, ma col tempo alcuni muri si sono estesi per 7 km, raggiungendo altezze di 8 metri. Inoltre, tutte le entrate sono accessibili soltanto di giorno e sono sorvegliate. Oggi, questi muri rappresentano gli attriti ancora esistenti tra le comunità. Inoltre, su alcuni di essi, i murales ripercorrono le storie e ricordano le vittime delle due fazioni. Vi è però una volontà di cambiamento. Progetti di dialogo tra le comunità e piani per il progressivo smantellamento dei Peaceful sono all'ordine del giorno, riaccendendo la speranza di un futuro senza muri.
To have been alive and be an adult during the conflict, you've got to be in your 40s now. So a lot of people here have no direct experience or no direct memory of any experience of it. So it does become increasingly remote, and I think a lot of those young people want to move on from that focus on what happened in the conflict and what happened 20 years ago. One of the challenges there is that the political class, the political leadership, is often dominated by people who were involved in some way in the conflict, whether as actively involved in organisations or having been victimised as a result of it. A lot of the people in the older generation do transmit their fears, their concerns, their experiences to the younger generation. You know, with the thing we talked about here, transgenerational trauma. You didn't experience it yourself, but your father did or your grandmother did. But, you know, people will still experience that or have that as something they need to take on board, rather than being put, recognise that that's a long time ago.
After my generation, I think people aren't going to care so much. And the anger and the bitterness isn't so bad, I think, now. I think that all is becoming easier with time. But I think we have to address what happened in the past, or a lot of people can't move forward. And they don't want to pass on something that held their family back, their loved one's death. They don't want to pass that on to their children, and their children, and their children. So I think that's very important here. They want it dealt with now. And finished with, and then everyone can get on with life. So I think maybe in the 60s and 70s, people thought the IRA were necessary because it was the only way people had to fight back. But they're not necessary today. We don't need them. They're not representative of Ireland or its Irish. And here on the border is the highest Remain of the UK, I think. And nobody's listening to us, the same as in the 60s and 70s, and no one was listening to us. So this historic not listening to the people of Northern Ireland is happening again. So I think that could cause problems. I don't know about violence, but of course a lot of people here turn to violence as a way of solving things. So there is potential for it, but I hope not.